and welcome to InfoSec Pros. I'm Kayne, Field CISO at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Bob Maley, Chief Security Officer at Black Kite. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Pleasure to be here. I always like hanging out with you. You're a great guy.
This should be a lot of fun. And because this is a live stream, if you in the audience have got a question for Bob or a question about Black Kite or about Hyperproof, please drop it in the comments on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we'll take those questions as we go. And speaking of questions, Bob, I want to start with some just very basic questions about our topic. What would you say some of the current challenges are with AI and with compliance today?
Well, in a nutshell, we can just do it in 30 seconds. AI is too agile, and compliance is too uh, uh, titanic.
Okay.
I actually I just published a LinkedIn article kind of around this. There's so much happening in AI that it's very challenging to keep up with it. Some of the big news. I sit on the AI and emerging technology working group at Shared Assessments, and one of the topics was Microsoft's investing in 3 Mile Island in Middletown, Pennsylvania.
That was not the news I expected I'd hear, where Microsoft is lighting up a formerly shuttered nuclear reactor so that they can get cheap electricity. I also saw that I think it was Amazon and Google are going to start buying micro reactors, I think is what they're called, to try and get their electricity bill down too.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I think it's a great idea what they're doing with TMI. It's that whole TMI story. I lived through it. I was a policeman. My jurisdiction was half of our jurisdiction was within the evacuation zone when they evacuated. So, I remember we were working 12-hour shifts and, for looting and all that, and going down in the middle of the night on the road right in front of the cooling towers, and I had no clue what this was.
Wow.
And I'm standing in front of the cooling towers going, what's happening? So, and the good news was at the time, there was a movie in the theaters called China Syndrome about a nuclear reactor melting down. But, it's this type of stuff that's going on. And now that's not going to happen overnight. I mean, until they actually, the one reactor one was never a problem. It was the other one that they've buried in cement. But bringing it back online, I think it's a great idea. But it won't happen until 28, 29. They've got regulatory things. There's a huge local, anti-nuclear community there. So, but the concepts just tell me that AI is evolving so fast. I use an AI-powered news aggregator to try to get all the new information about AI. I subscribe to different feeds about that, and every day it's something new. I just saw one, and I didn't get a chance to read it, that the new bots are going to be able to simulate humans at computers with mouse clicks and everything.
So wasn't there a title for that some years ago? It was not BPO, business process operations, but RPO, robotic process RPA or RPO, one of the two. Yeah. But it was the idea is you could simulate like common user tasks. But you're saying now that AI is going to be able to do that.
Yeah, and you look at every day, it's getting faster. There's a great book if anybody really wants to either get highly informed or highly petrified of where AI is going. It's by a gentleman named Ray Kurzweil. The Singularity is Near, I think is the title. It's just that really encapsulates where AI is going and why it's happening so fast. And we take the flip side, and and some of the stuff I did in my article yesterday. I'm a big Isaac Asimov fan, Foundation, and all the laws of robotics. The 3 laws of robotics to keep humanity safe from AI, and then there was the 0th law that the AI actually came up with on their own because they thought that the first 3 were too limiting. It's kind of scary to think about it, but there's a good moral compass there, and I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to regulate. We're trying to figure out how we can get AI under control to work for us, for the betterment of mankind. But we're using the same old regulatory processes. I did an analysis of the treaty, the AI treaty that just got signed in Europe. And
And we'll get to that definitely later in the show in detail. I want to talk to you about that one.
yeah, so I'll save that for then. But for it, to answer this one, it's really not a very agile way of regulating AI. So yeah, that's the biggest problem I see today. AI is going so fast, and compliance, regulations, how we're assessing the use of AI.
hmm
Same thing. Really slow and archaic.
So then, as a way of managing the risks associated with that, should companies prohibit access to AI tools for their employees?
Good luck with that.
I have to ask because I've had this question put to me. So you're saying good luck with that for prohibiting access to AI tools?
Yeah, so I've been in security for 5 decades. Started with law enforcement, IT, cybersecurity, and one of the things that I've learned is that whatever you prohibit them from doing, they'll figure out a way to get around it. They'll basically hack the system somehow,
hmm
and so you can prohibit it all you want, but you're like, what are you going to prohibit, and how are you going to block it? How many AI platforms are there? Just straight AI platforms. You can block domains, but then you've got how many plugins
hmm
in all the different browsers are AI powered. In your third party ecosystem. Have you reassessed any of your vendors that are marketing that new and better with AI?
Oh, of course, right. Yeah, that's a
Air
popular thing
quotes,
with people here.
obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, have you reassessed them? I mean, when you put them under contract and you started using them, they didn't have AI, and now they've introduced AI into the platform, and you may have gotten it for free. The old Microsoft model, let's let you use it for free, and they'll
hmm
start paying you. But have you actually considered the risks that's introducing in your organization as well? So I'm a big believer in you don't block it, you don't ban it or prohibit it, because I see a tremendous value that AI can bring in business with in so many different ways, and we could do a whole topic about that in development and marketing and in thought everything.
hmm
So you have to figure out a way of, well, how do you introduce it so you can control it, and you can see, and you can have your DLP platform see what's going in and going. It's allowing it, enabling the business to do what they want to do, because they're going to do it anyway, and
Right.
but giving them the ability to do it, but also keeping the reins, keeping the control that, as a CISO, that you really want to see.
Okay, and I want to go back to something you said earlier about how compliance is Titanic, and I'm thinking of Jack and Kate on the front of the boat. I'm sure that's not the Titanic move you're thinking of, but you're saying that compliance right now is quite slow, is how I'm interpreting that. And I want to talk about the future when we think about AI compliance and also AI security. Um, where do you see compliance evolving to try and become more agile as the AI technology is continuing to rapidly improve and outpace the compliance and regulatory controls?
So, and again, this is something that I find to be extremely frustrating in a lot of meetings that I go to. Everybody agrees that compliance is a baseline, essentially. I was in a presentation this morning. Uh, I can't remember the name of the organization, but they had 17 basic cybersecurity principles that should always be looked at in any vendor. 17. They've reduced that to a manageable amount. Uh, but then we look at compliance. The problem is, okay, so I'll take those 17 base level requirements, but then I'm going to go, well, but I need to add 7 more additional points of data about number 6, and I need to add 5 about this point. And when it's all said and done, I've now gone from 17. I'm back to 200 or 300 points of compliance that I want to investigate and uh, ask questions about. And
Hmm.
so we start out with the thought and the concept to make it agile, but people get involved, and people always want to make it more complicated. Uh, Look at the history of shared assessments, for instance. So shared assessments came out of the banking industry's need to have a common set of questions when they're assessing vendors,
Hmm.
because at that point everybody was doing their own thing, and vendors were getting questionnaires from everybody, and everyone was different.
And
So
certainly some variable quality in there as well in some of those initial questionnaires, although you still see that today. I think we did an earlier episode about security questionnaires, and they're not a beloved thing in the community.
Well, it's because we've gone back to then. Uh, so
Yeah.
shared assessments came out, and they standardized, and then that standard started inflating from a couple hundred questions to, at one point, I think there was over 2,000 questions, and the concept of scoping. I mean, it made progress, but then now everybody, oh, well, our question set is a little different, so we're going to break off. And,
Hmm.
we have all those different questionnaires. We're a vendor, and we get them all the time. We'll get, we'll get access to a platform to do a security assessment, and it might be anywhere between 100 and 800 questions. And it's like, well, we have a SIG, we have a SOC 2, we have our ISO certification. Oh, well, that's all good. You can upload them here, but you still have to answer the questions.
Yeah, no, that doesn't seem very efficient though. But
So
so are you saying that we're going to move away from that model as we're trying to like change the face of compliance because AI is really innovating so quickly, or do you think we're going to stay at that glacial Titanic pace?
we have to move away, but I'm afraid we're going to stay at that glacial pace because of, uh, for some reason, people aren't comfortable with a small set of questions. I remember talking to a gentleman who ran a third party risk program for a large bank, and they were heavily focused on vulnerabilities of their vendors, not
Hmm.
risk but vulnerabilities, and they were constant. They had a whole team to constantly harangue vendors, their vendors, to fix vulnerabilities, whether they were exploitable or not. But apparently, the bank got dinged once because they knew something and didn't say it. Now they just go overboard to the other
Oh,
extent.
okay. So they
So I
over
think that's just
rotated into
human
that
nature to
topic.
do that.
Yeah.
And so I think, with AI, I've been working on the different, so the AI treaty. There is NIST 600, I think. There is the Australian guidelines on development of AI. And I thinking, okay, so now we're starting to see things that are becoming part of law, different parts of the world. And ISO, is it what, ISO 4300? I
ISO
think
40,000, 41,000, I think it
is
is.
it.
I'm doing
Yeah,
a show
somewhat.
about that actually next month with Varun from BDO, where we're going to talk about ISO risk management of AI in
Yeah.
detail.
So yeah, I'll be there. Interesting. But so we have all these things that we're bringing up all these frameworks, and which framework do you use when you're assessing? Which framework do you use when you're building? And so and of course I'm using AI to help. I've trained a ChatGPT instance on all the public documents I have on those, to try to see if there's a commonality. And
Okay.
there's I forget how many pages of regulations and requirements between just three that I'm looking at so far,
Hmm.
and they did boil down to about 50 common questions. And that cross all the boundaries.
Well,
And
let's talk about that, because this is about AI security concerns and what we should be thinking about. And also, before we get letters to the editor, if you all remember those, it's ISO 42001.
okay, that's what
That
it
is
is.
for ISO risk management. I cited the wrong ISO one. Thank you to the production team for dropping that note in the chat. And if you have a question
Excellent.
for Bob about this, do drop those in the chat on LinkedIn or on YouTube as well. But Bob, what strategies should organizations really be focused on then, with the risk of emerging threats, while trying to remain compliant with these diverse AI regulations and requirements?
So I think it's about not so much about compliance. It's about identifying, well, what risks is the use case of AI uh, going to be. So you have to look specifically what's the use case. And the biggest problem, and I think the very first thing with AI risk was the exfiltration of confidential data
Hmm.
of people using public instances to work on code or drop in documents, those types of things. And there are a tremendous amount of methods that you can use to isolate that, that you can solve that. But really, trying to understand, what is the use case? Is it for uh, marketing? Is it to come up with content for marketing? And now it's more about are there any AI hallucinations? And I have noticed AI doesn't hallucinate quite as much as it used to. Um, it's getting better, but without understanding how you're going to use it and knowing what risks that present, uh, you can't really address it. Like you asked me the question before, should you just block it? You
Yeah.
know, that's the worst thing you can do, because then you have no idea what people are doing with it. They're going to go under the radar.
Well, let's take a work scenario. There was a court case out of Texas. And I'm thinking of it because I'm going to go visit a friend in Texas tomorrow, actually. And it was against a company that made an AI that was used in medical settings in hospitals. And the company was Pieces, I believe. And the Texas AG settled with them because they, in their advertising campaign, said that it had a very low hallucination rate of, I think, it was 1 in 100,000 chance of getting a severe hallucination, I believe was the term that
I
they
would
used.
love to see how they came up with that.
Well, that's the interesting thing here. The Texas AG found out that it hallucinated more frequently. And so the settlement was, and Pieces did not admit any wrongdoing, I will say this, but this settlement was that they found it was. They misrepresented in the advertising the hallucination rate. And so the question then is a two-part question here. If you're the vendor that's making the AI, how do you reduce the likelihood of an investigation from one of our various regulatory bodies, apparently now including the states attorney generals? And then second part, like if you're a purchaser, how do we have trust and confidence in the claims that are being made by those AI systems that are either we're buying deliberately or that are getting incorporated into the technologies that we use every day?
So uh, the old adage, trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, no, don't trust them. Don't believe them. Uh, do your due diligence to verify the claims. Uh, it's interesting. Uh, what has it been? Almost 2 years now since ChatGTP uh, became the latest rage.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah,
and
before then we were all talking about the metaverse.
yeah, yeah. What was that?
The idea that you could wear VR goggles and drink out of a coffee cup, which I've never seen done.
Yeah, really. That's yeah. Although with some of the things I've been reading about what they're going to be doing with medical nanobots, maybe it could actually happen. But that's a whole other thing.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, that's why I said
But
that the book.
what should we do to trust our vendors? And then, if you're a vendor, what should you do to reduce the likelihood of a regulatory outcome or a legal
So
penalty?
if you're making broad claims, you're probably lying. There is no broad intelligent AI yet. There are very specific use cases, and I think those vendors who are capable are using the very specific use cases with AI. They do testing. They maintain their own learning database. It's not in some public chat. They have processes in place that you can see documentation. You can do really fairly quick assessment to see how capable they are. It's if their claims are too good to be true,
Hmm.
they probably are. So don't trust but verify,
Okay.
because everybody's making the claim. Like Black Cat. Every conference I've been at, every booth, it's now with AI. I saw when last year's RSA, I checked a couple of those out, and it was now with AI, and I was looking. Well, okay, what you're doing is just a high-powered SQL query. How is that AI? And yeah, so when they say with AI or powered by AI, that's to me that's a red flag. Doesn't mean that they aren't doing something good, but it should be your red flag uh, to peel back the onion layers and to try to understand what is it that they are doing. And if they can't explain it to you, then that's probably a problem.
Yeah, and I think explainability has been a theme in at least some of the regulatory changes and laws that I've seen. But I want to go back to something I said there. I brought up the metaverse, which was a whole thing that apparently we were going to buy NFTs of land that we could have our NFT sneakers in. And it reminded me at that point, and AI has reminded me of the dot-com bubble. And we've both got enough gray hair to have been through the dot-com bubble. And
Yep.
how from your perspective, how do you see the current wave of AI investment and excitement evolving? Like, are we headed for a similar bubble like we had in the dot com era, or are the dynamics actually different this time for the underpinning financials?
Good question. So you look at the history of bubbles, and you go back the tulip bubble. You know
The Dutch. Yep.
the Dutch.
It's kind of not a very recent one, but I know where you're going with that
But
one.
so bubbles are historical. They always happen. I know if you look at the stock markets right now, that the bubble enthusiasts say that we're in an artificially inflated bubble. For over 10 years now, and you're gonna have a massive crash. And uh, I don't know enough about that to believe it or not. But AI, I think we're at a different stage. I think there are going to be obviously shakeouts in the industry, like there always are.
Hmm.
The real players from the wannabes. Uh, that the potential benefits of AI are far more significant than just profit. And I think that's what's going to drive this. Uh,
But isn't
I,
this more like the West Coast gold rush, where the people who really consistently made money were the people selling the spades and the pickaxes and the shovels and selling the lodging, kind of like Nvidia and electrical suppliers are currently doing now, where they're selling the hardware and they're because of the tremendous electrical costs associated with AI. Isn't this just really a boon for them and speculative at best for everyone else?
it's definitely a boon for them, but that's from a financial boon, uh, and but for everybody else, uh, AI, I think, is where it's going to shine in the near term. Obviously, is in the medical field. You mentioned, the lawsuit, but there are already cases that you have AI reading radiological scans that are more effective than a human radiologist. But it doesn't replace the radiologist, because it helps the radiologist be better. And who ultimately wins is the patient. You look at AI was used during the development of the vaccines recently. Whether you're pro or anti-vaccines, uh, it's irrelevant. What it does is AI can simulate so many different variables when they're developing them that you physically impossible. You can't do it. So it expedites that. So humankind, I think, is going to see the benefit as well as end users. Uh, when I was doing my analysis of the regulatory requirements around AI,
Hmm.
I could have read through every page of those documents, made notes, created a spreadsheet, um, and and do cross checks and to do what I did. But I used AI. Now, once the results were out, then is when you go back in and you do the cross checks and you make sure that it's not. But the productivity boom that it's going to bring is why I think uh, I don't see a bubble. I do see a shakeup, and I don't know. It's always the big companies with the money that can invest. Who else can buy a nuclear power plant?
Yeah, right now those are kind of at a premium. There aren't a lot of other spare ones hanging
Yeah.
about.
So that's I think they'll be the final players from that end. But there's topics we could talk about. Who is controlling then the what AI thinks and saying, and politics get involved. I mean, there's a whole
Well,
dirt you can
let's
you can go
let's take
through
a
there.
question from the audience, Bob. Let's take a question because I saw this come in, and I want to thank the audience. If you've got additional questions for Bob or for me about AI, about Black Kite, about Hyperproof, drop in the chat. And the question is, how can organizations effectively monitor and supervise the use of AI in their operations to mitigate compliance risks? And that's kind of to our earlier conversation where I
Yeah.
asked, like, hey, should we just block it because that seems to make the compliance risk go away magically? But at the same time, you think of those hospitals that are using that technology that may or may not hallucinate occasionally. Like, how are companies supposed to be able to manage those, or at least monitor the use of their AI today to know if they're at risk?
Yeah. So big, broad question. So just from a basic level, as I said, get control of it. So what we do is we block all public AI, but we have team instances of AI that we control that have been vetted, that essentially we know where our employees where they're using it. We also use data loss prevention just to monitor, what documents, what things are getting passed around or used there. Even though it's our instance, if somebody is going to drop in some highly confidential, that's we want to see that. So those are the basics, but things that I'm going to try to go after next. We're a small company. Those AI that get dropped in via uh, browser plugins.
Hmm.
And was it the round table that you held? Was it Tenable was there, or was that something else I was in?
I think that might have been something else that we were in.
So there are products. I can't recommend any because I haven't picked one, but that can actually do that kind of a real time audit of if in browser plugins if AI is present. So
That was
yeah,
a conversation you and I
it's
were
ringing a
in where we
bell.
were talking about data loss prevention, and yeah, I don't think Tenable was in it, but there were other vendors named. And again, not
Yeah, I
recommending
can't
any
remember who it
vendors,
was.
just saying that they do exist. But you're
Yeah,
saying that at least there's some technical controls at least that companies could adopt to
yes,
make an assessment of their level of risk right now.
yeah, because you have to use technology. There's the old technology of just blocking URLs and domains. That's uh,
As you said earlier, I don't think that's going to suffice given the rapid number of AI proliferations as well as the incorporation of them in basic technologies like telecommunications platforms we use today and for video conferencing, for example.
yeah. And the last part of that question, though, is you have to know what your compliance risks are. So, what regulatory frameworks are you subject to? And again, that's all over the map uh, because there. So, U.S. signed on to the treaty in Europe, but how effectively does that mean that companies in the U.S. are subject to it? NIST is not a regulatory requirement, but do you have a contractual requirement that you follow it? So, yeah, understanding what those compliance requirements are is probably the best step, and then going out and figure out, well, how do we mitigate those risks?
All right, and let's talk about something else on artificial intelligence that I think you and I talked about before, and it was the idea of companies that are using AI to improve AI. Kind of a crazy idea, right? So you're going to have an AI somehow supervise or interact with another artificial intelligence to improve AI. Where do you think the most promising areas where that feedback loop could really stand to revolutionize industries?
Well, there's good and there's bad. I read an article that there was a Discord chat that all its members were AI bots,
Oh, I've heard of this one. Yeah, it's a good story.
uh, and they started taking on personalities. There was one AI bot that would consistently have a mental breakdown, and
Hmm.
another AI bot who was like the mediator would bring them in off the ledge, almost like real humans, huh?
Yeah,
We've never seen anybody in chat rooms or on the internet have breakdowns and go crazy. That
you're
doesn't happen,
describing
right?
X right now, actually, formerly
Yeah,
known as Twitter.
yeah. So yeah, there's that. So I think uh, that's the dark side of bots of AI improving AI. But on the upside is the improvements that AI can make to itself or another I think will be significant and beyond our comprehension. And look at a specific example when they created the bot to play the game Go.
Hmm.
That the bot became so good at Go that nobody could beat it. But Go masters were seeing that there were new strategies that the bot was using that were inconceivable, that nobody understood them or even knew that could possibly be part of the game. So that's the next evolution, is that AI can go beyond the human capabilities of thinking. And so they may be able to bring improvements that are iterative, that uh, in a very short period of time, uh, can be significant. I chat GPT 4.0. There's a new feature that you can that is conversant with you.
Hmm.
Uh, so I started talking politics with it.
Oh boy, that must have probably went better than some other AIs I know on the internet.
I was shocked how objective it was across the board. Uh, very interesting, and actually, it came back with some very thought provoking questions.
Hmm.
Uh, that I hadn't thought of a certain angle. So, yeah, it's that whole idea of AI improving AI. I think it's already being done, obviously, but it's only going to improve. And as the cost of compute cycles continues to go down to next to nothing,
Hmm.
uh, it's just again, I don't think as a mere human, I really uh, don't know how it's going to improve, but it
But
will improve.
what about risks here, Bob? About or let's bring risks and ethics into this conversation. I was at the Gartner conference earlier this week on Monday or Tuesday, and a Gartner analyst was saying like AI is going to decimate middle management. Like it's going to not be a thing. We're going to have senior executives, we're going to have executives, and then we're going to have maybe people who are getting into jobs. And I've got to ask, like, if we're using AI to improve AI, are there some ethical risks that we should be looking at here? And what are those risks that we should be considering as companies are trying to adopt AI and as the technology continues to advance?
So you're combining ethics with getting rid of middle management.
I am, as a matter of fact, because if you think about classic career path for somebody, they start out in their career, they learn some stuff, they either get really good at it, and if they're at a company where you know the companies where you get really bad managers because the only way to get a pay bump is to become a manager, and so you get very good technical people who become very bad managers. But there's
Yep.
also people who go in like MBA students. they start out as a first level manager, and then they become mid-level manager with plans eventually becoming a senior. What if there's no middle manager level? Or what if that's massively reduced? Do we have to look at that as a consideration?
Well, consideration, I don't think is an ethical problem. I think it's a reality. If you look at the history of technology, every time some new invention comes about, uh, farming,
Hmm.
we all used to live on farms. Now, cows live on farms, nobody else. It's automated, it's technology, the improvement. So it's just part of the human condition that technology, and I believe this is a technological breakthrough that will change the world, and it may get rid of middle management. Uh, I don't think people. I don't think everybody's worried about everybody's going to lose their job and AI is going to do everything. I think what's going to happen is the people that have embraced AI and are using it to be more productive, whatever level they're in, uh, they will replace those people that aren't using it. Uh, that I think is an absolute path that's going to happen.
I think
And
that's true because we are a tool using species.
yeah,
Fundamentally speaking, we adopt tools.
so yeah, it's from that perspective, it's going to happen. It will happen. There's no doubt. Uh, I'm old enough to remember when there were protests in the streets about allowing students to use calculators.
Oh
Uh,
dear. The abacus
it,
makers were out in force, I imagine.
uh, Everybody, I mean, look it up. There's news articles that have and it's a real thing.
Wow.
But then
I missed.
now,
Didn't know that one.
yep, they were protesting that the use of calculators were going to destroy the minds of the youth. And do college students still have to buy one of those fancy big programmable
They
calculators
do.
now?
They do.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, I have two college students, and both of them have those fancy calculators,
yep, yeah.
graphing calculators. Like, you could probably do that on your phone, right? And they're like, "Yeah, the teacher says we have to use this."
Teachers aren't going to let you. But yeah, but seriously, it's that same concept. We always every technological innovation, there's always a certain group that they're going to fight because essentially they're afraid of change, and those who are embracing this change, those are the ones that will be there. Uh, I don't fear it. I saw a comment that people should fear AI more. They shouldn't use it as much. And I don't know. I don't think we should fear it. I think we shouldn't trust it. And we should, again, like I said, make sure what you're doing and what you're using it for, what the outcomes are going to be.
Hmm.
But yeah. I just think that's the destiny of AI.
I think that
And
takes us to a really good audience question as well, just on the use of it and what we should or shouldn't be using it for. And I want to thank the audience for providing a question. The question is, what are the potential implications of AI-generated content on intellectual property rights and compliance?
well, I think it's going to change everything because of the difficulty. There's I just so I just saw the producer of the movie I, Robot is
Hmm.
suing Elon Musk because Elon's robots look too much like the robots in iRobot.
Interesting.
Um, but in reality, the producer of iRobot, uh, he ripped off Isaac Asimov. uh, so it is extremely challenging. And uh, I don't see a successful way without some type of a technology innovation for watermarking intellectual property. And again, that's beyond my technical knowledge, but um, it's. I look back when I was a forensic guy, and I learned about steganography and what you could put in pictures. So I think that the technology's there, and I'm sure that somebody's working on it. Somebody probably already has something like that. But I think having that ability to do that, uh, and you look at intellectual property and plagiarism. It's in the papers today. That it's happening in every walk of life, in politics, and in art. The memes, and I was having this conversation. I was having a crown yesterday, and I
Okay.
was in between when I had the ability to talk. The dentist and I were chatting about the AI, and how do you know what's real? And when it comes to images on the internet, I automatically assume that it's AI or been photoshopped, out of the box, because probably 90% of the time I'm going to be right.
Okay.
And so changing how we assess our own risks uh, around that is one thing. The other thing is like I said, how do we protect people's intellectual property? That's the question of the century. Uh,
Let me bring in something else from the Gartner conference from earlier this week at the Gartner Expo, where one of the speakers was saying something they fully expect in the next 5 years to be part of most employment contracts for professionals is a licensing agreement for your image and likeness and voice to be used in perpetuity, potentially as an avatar or similar representative for the company. And I think then in Hollywood, the Actors Guild, the
yeah,
SAG, just recently had a whole problem with that, and rightly so, where the concern is like, if I make 5 movies, if I have a contract that has, I don't know, make 5 Adam Sandler movies, we'll pick on him for a moment, and I have some stock footage left over, can I make another 5 Adam Sandler movies?
yeah.
Because like I've got this footage laying around, can't I just use an AI to bin it together? And they're saying this is going to happen at the corporate level, where employees like you and me, especially probably me as somebody who does podcasts, this becomes a material concern from an intellectual property rights perspective. Like, do you think that's going to start changing the narrative around the ability of individuals to control their own likeness?
So yeah, you're just you made me think. How do I know you're not an AI right now?
I could grab my cat, and that would prove that I'm not an AI. I have to see if he's
Yeah,
around.
yeah, because AI can't do cats.
You are not wrong. If I see him walk by, I will grab the
Yeah,
cat.
please do that. But no, it's a good question. There are, yeah. Um, I'm trying to think. This is the first I've heard that, and I'm trying to think if that were me and I had to sign a contract to do that. Uh, I would probably not sign. For me, it's control.
Mhm.
Although the older you get, I look back at my different passport pictures, and I'm going, oh yeah, they can have that old. I wish I could do that and refresh.
The forever
Doesn't
young Bob.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't work that way. But that's another topic. AI has potential to fix that. But anyway, uh, it's yeah, that is a question that people are going to have to face, because I am sure that if there is a bottom line reason for a company to require that they'll ask. So yeah, scary, isn't it?
I think the main part of it that I took away from the Gartner conference was that some people may make royalties in the future, just as a consequence of their employment agreement, much like actors or people who are in sitcoms that get serialized and then distributed out on the streaming channels see some small amount of royalties. That may actually become a weird consequence of all of this, assuming employment law
Oh,
manages to get ahead of AI.
when you're planning for retirement, you're supposed to have multiple income streams. That'd be great. Okay, yeah, I'll sign mine over as long as I get royalties. So
Fantastic. We will get you
see
into
how quick
our
I
deep
flipped
fake
on that?
studio next. That'll be
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
Well, as we get towards the last 15 minutes of this, let's go back to the EU and the Artificial Intelligence Act there, which has been a pretty significant regulation that's garnered a lot of attention. So this is different than the AI treaty. I will say that this is the AI Act, which has different classifications of risk associated with AI systems, and saying some of them just are not not okay at all, like trying to do behavior and emotional detection in classrooms would be a completely prohibited use, whereas an AI chatbot is probably okay, and an AI spam filter is 100% okay. So, how do you think that's going to impact AI innovation and really the regulatory landscape for business operations globally?
So yeah, interesting. It's again what we're trying to do is we're trying to regulation always tries to protect, but it always stifles something. It's having the balance between those two,
Hmm.
uh, and my worry is that who are the people that are making the decisions about what's appropriate and what's not. Uh, that's to me that's an ethical dilemma right there. It's like the free speech argument that's going on in the U.S. right now. Who gets to control it or define it? It's not who defines it gets to control it,
Hmm.
and so that's the challenge. How do we do that? And how do we do that it doesn't stifle, that it doesn't impact one community greater than another? I mean, humanity. It's uh, and I use the example of the three laws of robotics
Hmm.
that Asimov, I think it was 42 in an article that eventually came out in part of a book and then it became a book, but it was essentially the core of everything he did around foundation. It's that, harm no human, don't allow harm to come to a human, and don't allow harm to come to yourself if it affects a human.
Hmm.
Uh, but then after a couple thousand years of AI living under those regulations, that half of the AI entities said, "Well, it's not good enough. We have to add something that preempts them." So they came up with their own programming, and they called it the zeroth law. And the zeroth law essentially was the first law, but not by human, but for humanity in general. And so there's two warring factions then in the AI.
Right.
There were those who believed in the fundamental three, and then the rest who believed in the zeroth law. And essentially, what the zeroth law gave AI capability of doing was making a decision that, well, we have this planet, and there's 4 billion people on this planet, and what they're doing is going to affect uh, 50 other planets and 100 billion people. We can erase those 4 billion people because they made the decision for the greater benefit of humanity that erasure fell under the zeroth law.
But that's science fiction, and I want to draw it back to the AI Act, which is not being written by artificial intelligence, but it's being written by lawmakers in the European Union, and ultimately it's going to affect U.S. based businesses because it's ultimately extraterritorial,
But
and
ultimately,
it also is
it comes from
intersectional with
science fiction, though.
GDPR. It
It
comes
is
from science
science
fiction,
fiction
yes, sure, and they were out
because
ahead of it better than what they did in California,
who is
where ultimately
defining
they passed it,
who
but
is
it wasn't able to go
defining
there.
AI's impact on humanity? That's the
So
question in that
that is
act.
speculative in that act, but they did go into like a high risk system. They've said this is a prohibited activity that you can't make or sell an AI. Now I'm going to set aside Russia and North Korea and other pariah states that are threat actors in our modern cybersecurity landscape. They're going to do things that are objectionable from many angles.
Yep,
But
no
general
question.
purpose AI manufacturers are prohibited from doing certain things and need to have controls on other activities. Do you think that's going to ultimately like be a net win and a net positive, or do you think that's going to ultimately stifle innovation?
Yes,
It'll be a net win that stifles innovation.
yes, because there has to be guardrails, and what they are, I don't know. This is a question that uh, we need to reach the singularity so we can think like an AI. But until then, it's what always concerns me in regulation is how have those risks been set? Who is it? A legislative body? Is it a couple of individuals sitting in a some high tower someplace? And is there a way to change that? if we find that they're not very accurate or they are stifling too much. And if those features aren't built in an agile way, and they probably aren't, because they always say you can make those changes, but the ability to make those changes is so hard that they don't ever happen. So that's the problem with those types of things that I have. I'm not saying that they're a bad thing. We do
I'm
need to
thinking of
have
like
guard.
what they did in California recently, where the legislature, elected body of California, and they have a full-time legislature, so they can work on this 364 days a year. I think they take a
We
day off.
know we,
Maybe they take 10 holidays, whatever. But
we,
they
we
put
know they
something
don't.
on.
We know they don't keep that schedule.
Sure, but they have a permanent standing so they can work on stuff. They took all the feedback, they came up with a bill, and ultimately their governor, Gavin Newsom, vetoed the bill, even though
Hmm.
it was passed by the legislature there. Which, interestingly enough, a lot of the concern on the AI bill out of California, which tends to follow the EU, a lot of the concern was on testing requirements and on how that could legitimately stifle innovation because nobody quite knew how to test stuff at scale to be able to continue to ship product. The EU doesn't have anything like that in there, though. So, I mean, I'd posit the EU one at least is a little more open and transparent than what we saw happen and what could have happened if California's AI Act had moved forward.
Yeah, interesting that it didn't get signed. Funny that it happens to be the home of some of the biggest AI companies, uh, and you know, money talks.
Oh yeah, and there were concessions made to the manufacturers of AI. I think that's
Yeah.
ultimately the challenge that we have is there are obviously multiple parties interested in the success or in the limitations associated with artificial intelligence.
Exactly, and that act, it didn't get signed. I didn't include that in any of my work simply because, well, it didn't become law. But you look back. The problem with that is it's the California legislature. How does that affect people in New York?
Hmm. Well,
How does that?
and I think we're seeing that again. Let's the way we do things in the United States because of our federalism is we have state by state laws, which from an attorney's perspective is crazy making or profit making, depending. Like that thing that happened in Texas, the fact that their AG was able to litigate and reach a settlement. I didn't even know they passed an AI law in Texas, and I try to track this stuff. I know that Colorado is going pretty hard against AI with their act, and I know that NYDFS just released a letter saying,
Yeah,
here's a preview of what you're going to deal with in the future. But the
yeah.
fact that Texas just snuck in quietly and dropped a law, and nobody got the memo, apparently, including the companies selling AI inside of Texas. I think that becomes a risk, though, for companies to not understand what their regulatory and legal compliance burden is as this is evolving so quickly.
Well, absolutely. And that, like you said, it's how do you keep up with this? Yeah, what and we're to a point now. How many businesses, if it's an online business, you are not doing business in a single state.
Right.
So 50 states and all of the acts around the world. That to me, that is a problem. It's a benefit to lawsuits, obviously,
Hmm.
because it's so hard to gather and fathom how it affects you as an individual company. Uh, and again, like I said, the guardrails are important, but how do we get guardrails that are uh, broad enough that it covers not just the U.S. but it covers uh, yeah. You mentioned the bad actors that aren't going to follow any of those guardrails. How do we build our guardrails that allows our military, and then you get to be able to do what they have to do to defend against those guys? But then, wait a minute, now we give our military, it's that other side of the coin. Now we've given our military too much power. You know, uh,
I think the folks
Skynet.
over at Cybercom would tell you that they have pretty strict writ that they have to follow, whereas folks with ASD down in Australia, they don't really. They're able to do stuff that most other countries look at and go, "Well, that's fun that they got away with that. We don't have that ability right now, for
Yeah.
better or for worse." But ultimately, I think the thing I see from a challenge perspective, companies really need to start tracking and doing horizon scanning on what are their contractual, legal, and regulatory requirements, and then map those to their existing controls at scale, and try to see how much of the existing controls, because none of these AI things are saying much new, especially coming from your lineage and my lineage in cybersecurity. Much of this is very
Yeah.
familiar, except for
Yeah.
maybe ethical, societal, socioeconomic decision making, which is it's kind of a fun little spot to be in and to consider controls for. But ultimately, I think companies, once they can understand that and can do a gap analysis, you can reuse a lot of your controls that you already have established. But if you don't do that, if you don't actually take the time to evaluate what your obligations are, you do run a higher risk of just what is that quote? Ignorance of the law doesn't mean you can ignore the law. And I
Yeah.
think that's really the world we're in with AI right now.
Well, and the problem of even knowing what you're contractually obligated to, because uh, how many contracts are the same? The whole process of redlining. It just every time I see that or I go through that, I get a headache. Because it's like you're playing poker. Uh,
Mhm.
what are you going to give up to get? But then, how do you track? Do you have enough staff? Do you have a system? Do you have contract management to know what you're actually obligated to? Like breach notification. Uh, every company wants to put their own breach notification timelines in that don't follow anything else.
Mhm.
And if they're adamant, well, we're not going to sign the contract unless you agree to that. Now you've got multiple things, and you've got to boil down to the shortest one. I mean, just the whole idea of contracts. Oh, well, maybe AI could help us with that.
Could do. I have a friend of mine who actually has a company that does that. Weird enough, but don't want to mention that. And I also just clocked the time. We are coming to the top of the hour here, Bob.
How did that
Um,
happen?
funny, I kind of suspected this would be one of those wide-ranging conversations that we'd have trouble keeping it under an hour. But with that, I want to start wrapping up. And thank you for being on the show today, Bob. And if
My
you're
pleasure.
watching this in the audience, and if you know somebody who we should have on the show, or alternatively, like if you're that person who we should have on the show, drop a note in the comments or just DM me directly. But with that, Bob, I really want to thank you again for joining us. And I want to thank our audience again for tuning in to today's live stream.
You bet. My pleasure.